Test, test, test. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us today. We have a large group here of presenters. We're talking about ramping up resident research, which is strategies for getting your residents engaged in research and scholarship. We're going to talk a little bit about the scholarly activity requirement, as well as some successful strategies that we've utilized at our institutions, as well as some barriers that we've run into. My name's Josh Davis. I'm an emergency physician in Wichita, Kansas. We have our large group of presenters and contributors here, some of whom are here in person and some of whom who are not. We're going to do our little introductions and icebreakers. So we're going to talk about our name and our title, but then we're also going to tell you our favorite candy. And I don't like candy because I'm a health icon.
I'm Maura Davenport. I'm the APD at Allegheny General in Pittsburgh. I do like health food, but I also do have a really bad sweet tooth, unfortunately. And I would probably say it's a toss-up between Butler's chocolates from Dublin, Ireland, Three Musketeer, and Heath Bar. So I don't...
That's a lot.
I can't decide. It's an issue.
Hi, everyone. I'm Alina Tsirolnik. I'm one of the APDs at Yale. I don't eat candy much, but when I do, I'm going to go for the good stuff, Godiva dark chocolate truffles.
There you go.
It's fancy. I was not prepared for this because we didn't know we were getting this icebreaker. So I'm Mike Alib at Rush in Chicago, and I don't eat a ton of candy, but I ate I have mints and Shift, which I think is probably good because I drink coffee, so it's like a balance. It's really for everyone else. It's mostly to benefit the world around me. And yeah, that's probably my go-to for those who are Russian, have seen me like crushing mints.
I'm Hillary Moss. I am the Assistant Director of Simulation at Montefiore in the Bronx in New York City. And my favorite candy is a Reese's. Hell yeah.
Hi, I'm Susan Wojcik. I'm the Research Director at SUNY Upstate Medical University in Syracuse, New York. And I am very much a candy addict. I am a sweet tooth, but I have had to pick one. I would say anything with dark chocolate in it.
All right, going on here.
And I am Jeff Hill. I'm one of the APDs at the University of Cincinnati, and I agree Reese's are the best.
James Paxton, Wayne State University, Detroit, nerds.
Daniel Jordan, fourth year, Henry Ford in Detroit, and ashamed to say it, but it's Mr. Goodbar.
Mike DiFilippo, fourth year at New York Presbyterian, Columbia, and Cornell, and incoming EMS fellow to University of New Mexico. I'm a huge Reese's shill. I will gladly take a sponsorship by them, and it's my next tattoo. I already have a cheeseburger tattooed on me, so.
But you don't have any disclosures for this presentation, right? Not yet, not yet. So the goal of this presentation is to have like a group discussion and to talk about barriers and kind of strategies to do that. We're going to talk a little bit about some that we pre-identified and some ways to address them, as well as kind of the scholarly activity requirement, kind of the history and how it's kind of changed recently. At the end, we're going to have a kind of panel discussion. I have some questions pre-formatted, but really what I'd like is for you all to kind of tell us what your experiences are and what are some of the things that you've run into. Again, we think that we've experienced some of those things, but it would be nice to have a discussion and some input on ways that you've been successful or issues that you've run into. So I'm going to pass this off now, and we'll move on.
All right, so just to echo what Josh said, we have one disclosure. That's Dr. Wojcik, who does get some support from Hillrom. Other than that, none of us have any disclosures. So we have a few.
Sorry, you can just use the podium mic, the one that's right there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. So we do have a few objectives here. By the end of this session, we hope that you'll be able to describe the value of scholarly activity to residency training. We also will help you be able to list 3 tangible strategies that can improve resident involvement in these scholarly activities. And lastly, develop one strategy that you can take back to your specific program and help really increase resident productivity in the scholarly research areas. So just a little bit of our structure. The first part, we're going to discuss the background of the resident scholarly activity in the face of the ACGME framework. Secondly, we're going to discuss the current state of resident engagement in scholarly activity. And then lastly, we'll have our panel discussion.
Alrighty, so I was tasked with a very exciting part of this in talking about the ACGME requirements. So ACGME wants our residents to participate in scholarly activities. And the QR code is just going to get you to some bedtime reading about all of the ACGME requirements if you're curious. So specifically, A physician must be able to think critically, evaluate the literature, appropriately assimilate new knowledge, and practice lifelong learning. That's kind of the purpose of why we ask our residents to participate in research. The curriculum must advance the residents' knowledge of the basic principles of research, including how research is conducted, evaluated, explained to patients, and applied to patient care. So that is directly from what the ACGME is asking us to do. However, scholarly activity can be very different depending on where you are, what kind of residency you are, what the strengths of your program are, and most importantly, what do your residents want to do when they leave your residency program. That's why, even though they have this requirement to do scholarly work, there's a very broad list of what actually counts. So you can see that things like educational projects, curricula, or on the other end of the spectrum, you have, the peer-reviewed research. All of those count. And we'll go a little bit more into detail. You don't need to squint. But the list was just there to show you how long the list really is. Giving you a little bit of a background perspective of where this came from. So rewind back to 1999, where our specialty was a little bit younger, and we tried to establish ourselves to show the world and other specialties that we belong as a specialty on its own and have robust research to prove that. The consensus of research directors came up with pretty strict requirements of what they thought our residents should be producing. So they wanted a hypothesis, data collection, analytical thinking, and the interpretation of results. So they were very focused on what research should be as a process. Fast forward 20 years, Kane and his colleagues developed another best practice list of what the products of research should be from our residents. And they basically dictated that our residents should have written documentation of what they did. They should have protocols that have been enacted and drew conclusions, as well as research abstracts or oral presentations. So both of those things the process was very much emphasized, as well as the products. And you can already see kind of what I just talked about in the prior slides, where the reality is that the ACGME, not we, but the ACGME accounts for diversity of programs and accounts for the fact that not all residents are going to be wanting to be researchers when they finish residency. And thus they identify what they want pretty vaguely, as opposed to the theory from the research directors, and the Kane article I mentioned is very strict. They talk about the process and the outcomes and pretty strictly define what both of those mean.
Great, I don't like standing behind a podium, so I'm gonna stay over here. As far as scholarly activity, here's the challenge we all face. We have our residents. Most of them are not gonna become researchers. That's pretty true, right? There's very few sites. There's a couple programs that tend to solicit and have a higher concentration, but not everyone ends up being a researcher, so what do we do with them? How do we tailor this experience for our wide range of users who are gonna have varying degrees of research experience? Some may have a lot, some may have less. Different career paths. If you're going to the community, what you're going to take out of this is going to be markedly different than if you're going to a research fellowship. But they're all our residents. We have to plan around that. We have to adapt to this broader group of it. And we have to make sure it's a meaningful experience for them that's tailored to them. Because having someone who's going into the community go through the process of doing a pseudo R01 is probably not a meaningful experience to them, and they're not going to want to ever do it again. But if you can find something that they will use again, they will do community-based research. They will be the ones that help us to apply things outside of this environment. If we tailor it to our learners, it's going to be higher yield. Now, we're going to talk about some of the perceived barriers, and we're going to elaborate this more when we get to our panels. But a lot of these, you'll start to notice a theme, which is these are not unique to our residents. Who here has experienced imposter syndrome at some point in their research? Come on, show of hands. Yes, everyone's gone through this. So some of this will resonate. Think about as we talk through these, not just the strategies we give, but what worked for you as well. But you have a resident who says, yeah, if I try to research, well, they'll realize how little I know about this. Don't we all kind of feel that sometimes when we go put something in, we're like, oh, someone's going to realize I don't know what I'm doing up here. So how do we combat that, right? Maybe it's in the context that they just don't have prior experience. So they may be humbled and scared of the stats. There's some component that they'll fixate on, and they may not realize the other things they bring to the table. Well, a couple things. First of all is normalize it. We need to normalize. When I said how many people have this, every single person raised their hand, or most everyone did, and some maybe on their phone. But everyone probably at least internally felt this experience of, yeah, we all have this. We need to normalize this, humanize it, so we don't seem like we're at a level above it and that we never went through it, because we went through this too. Normalize it for our residents, reassure it, and then help them come up with a solution to it. How do we get through it? We have someone that's our supporter, whether it's be the cheerleader behind the scenes, it's the mentor, it's the sponsor, it's often a combination of all of those things. Having someone that they can kind of go to that will help to support them in that capacity. We're going to help them find that person. Who's going to be the person that aligns, whether it's they're going to align personalities, they're going to align on their academic interests. Maybe it's someone they just had they felt like they have a connection with. We want to connect them with a mentor. We want to help support them in that capacity. We need to give them timelines, because timelines are a learned thing. No one knows how long it takes until you've done it. And they don't have the benefit of having gone through multiple studies. We need to help support them, give them a timeline, give them expected deliverables, because if you think about how long residency is, 3 to 4 years, you lose your first year often just getting used to the environment, come up with a project. Now you have 1 to 2 years to really get something done and out and in place to then try to publish during your last year. That's a tight timeline. That's a tight timeline for any of us, especially when you're still learning to be a doctor and starting learning how to be an emergency physician. We need to give them a sense of what's a normal timeline and help work with them to give them those goals.
So now we're going to talk about another difficulty when it comes to doing research. So you have this resident and they come up with this project and they're really excited about it and they've really thought through a lot of the aspects of what's going on. They want to do a qualitative study on burnout and wellness, which is a hot topic these days. And they want to do focus groups with the residents, and they want to code them with software, and they want to give out Starbucks gift cards to participants to try and get people involved. And they're really excited about this project. And they want to collaborate with people to make sure that it's a really good study. And you're thinking to yourself, this resident's really enthusiastic, but there are a lot of parts of this that need some money, and we don't have any of that. So how do you continue to support this resident, but figure out how to get funding for them? So luckily, there are lots of grants out there that oftentimes we don't even really know about. And because so few people know about them, not a lot of people apply to them. So SAEM, for instance, has multiple RAMS research grants, which are for residents and medical students that are $5,000. The EMF and EMRA have multiple research grants up to $10,000 that residents can apply for. And even like internally, either departmentally or at your own institutions, there are oftentimes grants that are available for medical students, for residents. And they're oftentimes like at a much lower level of how rigorous they're going to be in reviewing it, because they understand that these are people who are new to research. And so these are definitely places that you can send your residents and try to help them through it.
Okay, I get the slide that I think you probably have all been waiting for. What's an IRB, right? So we all have to tackle this and we all struggle with this. So your resident has the research project, they've got it all designed, and they're all ready to get started and they're so excited, but wait, everybody hold up a minute. Did you get your IRB approval? And they say, what's an IRB, right? So if I can do this, the problem, residents often have little understanding of how how many research regulatory requirements there are, and how it is that they should navigate the IRB. So some of the solutions that we work out at our place too is we have some everybody has required research education that they have to do before they can even get something reviewed by our IRB. And so we make our residents in their intern month complete that training. That helps them be set up so that they've already kind of got that out of the way when they are finally starting to do their research. And it also makes them able to help us with any of our prospective studies that are going on in our emergency department. Because if we have something that has to flow through our EPIC system, they can't get eligible to do that unless they are on an IRB study and have this training. The other thing is, while this is a required process of the research for them, we don't want this to be the burden or the stumbling block to getting their research done. That's really not our intent with this. So I try to help them as much as possible with using templates for how to design things for their research study, giving them examples of previous ones that were approved, You do have to keep those up to date. We just had a massive turnover in our administration of our IRB, and they're viewing things very differently than the last 20 years have done. So keep those up to date. And then really make sure that somebody has reviewed that before you let them push that submit button, and make sure that you've kind of tried to work out any of those kinks. Because again, while we're used to this rinse and repeat with them, it's very frustrating to the residents when they don't get that approval, or it doesn't go as smoothly or as quickly as it does for them. So while it's really something that's required for the research, we really want to try to make that as painless as possible for them. And then after this, next part is really going to have our panel. So I don't know if our panel wants to go ahead and come on up and get situated. And we are definitely hoping that you guys will give us lots of questions to answer. Any comments that you have, concerns, opinions, anecdotes. We've got lots of things on here. I didn't realize when I got with this slide that there was all those choices there. But we are open to answering and discussing any of these things with you. I'll give it back to Josh.
All right, so this is the part where we open up to you all. So I'm going to come down the middle here and kind of start to take questions. Our next icebreaker is, how do you feel about the presidential election? I'm just kidding, just kidding, just kidding. No. Who has a question or an issue? Oh, yes, great.
Hi, I'm Silas Busman from the University of New Mexico. I'm just curious, how many of you have non-clinician research professionals assisting in the shepherding of your research, your residents through the research process?
You guys should have a mic up there. You can. It's perfect for Dr. Wojcik.
There you go. Can you hear me okay? So I come from Columbia and Cornell. We have non-clinical researchers in the department. The way our residency is structured, the PGY2s actually come to SAEM. They meet with our clinical researchers, and part of that too is offline meet with the non-research faculty or non-clinical research faculty if they're interested beyond that. Outside of that, they play a little bit of a role coming into the ED to collect surveys, talk with patients, that sort of stuff. So there's a lot of non-formal interaction with the non-clinical research faculty, but outside the PGY2 structured introduction to the scholarly activity and setting up the next 2 years, we're a 4-year program, there's not much formal interaction with the non-clinical research faculty.
At Henry Ford, we have somewhere between like 5 and 10, depends. I see them throughout the department, and they're assigned to different staff. And if you work on a project with them, you can utilize them as you see fit.
I'm at Wayne State University. We offer pretty much the same services that our faculty have to our residents, as long as they're working with a faculty member. So whether that's stat support or assistance with drafting a submission for a grant application, whatever it is. And but the key part of that is they have to have a faculty mentor who's buying into the project, supervising, they're drafting the protocol. So at least we feel like it's probably legitimate at that point.
At UC, University of Cincinnati, we do as well, and I would really emphasize the importance of having somebody that can help out with the biostats portion of things. That has been, we had a period of time where we did not have that resource immediately available within our department, and it was definitely a barrier to having residents do scholarly research. And now having that back again over the past several years, you can really just see what a big difference it makes.
Yeah, at SUNY Upstate, we have myself as the research director who's a PhD. We have a vice chair of research now who is a clinical MD. I have a research program manager. She helps with a lot of regulatory things. She has a nursing degree. And then I have 2 research coordinators that are full-time, and I have 5 part-time research assistants as well. So if it is something clinical that they're doing, certainly all of those people would be involved in trying to help execute things in the clinical environment, so they aren't sort of responsible for prospectively collecting all their data themselves. But external to that type of a study, the rest of us would be certain resources for them to get their research accomplished.
Okay, who has, great question, good answers. Who has another question or issue they've run into? Oh, back here.
This is great. Thank you, guys. My name is Travis Olives from Hennepin. I just wanted to reiterate or highlight or totally agree with your comments about the IRB. Our IRB process at Hennepin is, it's somewhat opaque only in the sense that the user interface to enter everything that you need to is completely dissociated from whatever the decision is. And the way that we've handled this with our interns is to make sure that they actually are developing their protocol in the context of one of the templates that you mentioned. So for what it's worth, just a comment that I would strongly encourage it, because the trip-ups for our interns and PGY2s are really the clicks and the trying to find the places to put the right data, and not the inability to do it. It's just the frustration of trying to find the right place to do the right thing. So.
Yeah, great tip. Do any of you guys have any other tips for dealing with IRB or building a culture of an IRB that is understanding of emergency medicine?
Yeah, I realized that wasn't a question, but thank you. It's a good comment. I think the key at our shop is that we actually tend to put a study for IRB purposes under the PI as the faculty member. What that does is it adds some continuity so that if that resident tires out, you can swap in somebody else, right? You can have med students, other people assisting. You're not dependent on that resident to carry the ball as much. Also, the faculty probably have more experience with the IRB submission process. Also, it legitimizes using resources such as regulatory personnel to fill out the forms for the IRB submission. So I think, at least in my opinion, the value of going through the submission to the IRB is really learning what does the IRB want to know, how do I prepare a protocol. It's not to be tortured to death with decimal points and click boxes, right? So they shouldn't have, in my opinion, they shouldn't have to deal with that. So we try to keep that away from the residents and just let the residents focus on the project.
I'll add to that a couple of things that we've done at Cincinnati that have also been pretty helpful is we worked with our IRB and have defined a couple of registry type IRB protocols. One that deals with clinical data that's through our EPIC system, and another one that deals with educational research, where we will basically can approve projects through this umbrella IRB for educational research projects, assuming they meet certain criteria, certain learner groups, that sort of thing, which really lowers the barrier, just on the face of it for that resident that wants to do a quick QI-ish type project on an education intervention that they did. I have a colleague who had gone over to another institution and tried to bring that same thing there and has had issues with their IRB, so your mileage may vary a little bit in terms of getting those implemented, but that pathway does exist and has been done elsewhere and has been very helpful for us as well.
Yeah, my question is in all your experiences, do you have the residents doing all of this asynchronously on their own time? Are there any built-in electives? Are you a 3-year or 4-year program? And how do you manage that piece? Is there anything built into didactics that supports the resident from a perspective of, I'm coming into this knowing nothing, and how do you support them without necessarily having each individual faculty member kind of lead them through it individually?
Yeah, I'll start and pass along, because I think you'll encounter that there's a lot of different structures at a lot of different programs. At Cincinnati, the scholarly activity requirement is met through essentially a QI knowledge translation type of project. And the endpoint for that is within their second year, where the project gets done during that second year, and they have a grand rounds presentation coming up. And so there's a natural timeline that's built in there where if they don't have it ready, then there's an hour where we're just going to be sitting and staring at each other in grand rounds, which will be very uncomfortable. So there's a huge impetus to get it done. And then they have a faculty mentor that can help them through the subsequent process of getting it approved through the QI committee and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think it's key to have a central person kind of in charge of resident research. Doesn't have to be called a resident research director, but somebody that's the go-to person who knows the resources, knows the landscape, knows where to find things, how to get things done, and having that person available, importantly, for residents when they want to talk about a project and get started, because that process is difficult. They shouldn't have to learn everything. They should just need to come up with an idea and be taught how to develop that idea into a clinical question and develop a protocol. But I think that's a key part of it. And part of that also is getting buy-in from your department, from the leadership of your department, that this is a priority for our program. We need to, not necessarily, you may not have the money to finance resident research, but you certainly can have the enthusiasm to support it and potentially maybe even protected time for the individual who's charged with working with residents on these topics. So.
Yeah, at Ford, we do have an elective rotation you can do of research that's a month long. And then other resources we do have, obviously a research librarian who can assist with your background research. And then the hospital system itself has a manuscript editor who can actually help the residents write the manuscript, which I think is super helpful.
At Columbia and Cornell, we do have 3 months of senior elective time, of which you can use, like I've used all of mine for research. And that's been great because that's provided me, and when you do that, we do have 2 resident research coordinators on both of our clinical sites that are very involved and hands-on. And when you decide to take an elective like that, you really get the whole like introduction to however deep you want to go. If you want to meet with the statisticians, you can meet with the statisticians. They'll help you write grants. They'll help you write, your draft proposals, all that sort of stuff, which has been fantastic. But again, at our institution, I don't think it's necessarily just us. It's just how far the resident themselves wants to take it. But there's no limit necessarily. I think we have very supportive chairs on both sides if residents want to pursue scholarly activity like that.
Actually, one thing to keep in mind is that there are a lot of online resources that can educate residents and medical students on statistical and research concepts, like just to, shameless punch for SAEM, the research learning series, right, that the research committee has developed over the years, has a lot of stuff that's very highly relevant for like junior investigators, people that are just getting started in research. So I would absolutely look for those resources, and that's part of like having a person who knows where to find things. They'll know to look and to direct the students and residents to that resource. At my institution, we do offer on a case-by-case basis a month that you can do like an elective, and so you can focus on your research topic, your scholarly activity project. But not everybody takes us up on that because, frankly, not everybody wants to do like a really high-powered research project.
I meet with the intern class and certainly present what our requirement is for our research, and in that I do lay out a timeline for them so they can see sort of the components that we're asking them to learn about throughout the process and how you can split that up over your 3 years and do that in a manageable chunk of time. We do ask them to work on a project from coming up with a research question. Generally, they are clinical based, and that is what I like them to focus on. In getting my help, they also have to get a clinical mentor as part of their research team as well. And then they have to end with submitting an abstract for a meeting. They don't have to get accepted or presented, but we do ask them to at least write that abstract and present that at a meeting. I have 3 lecture slots throughout the year. We tend to hope that those will be presentation times for the residents to present their research instead of waiting till the end of their 3rd year and it's something they did 2 years. I mean, some of our residents will get this done in their 1st year. It's certainly a doable thing to do. But if no one's presenting, they get me on a research topic of my choice. The program has been growing in the sense of the interest, I think, in research, and we are getting more residents that are more interested in doing research, and so they have asked, and I think there's going to be an ask from our residency administration to do some other specific research-targeted lectures throughout the curriculum as well.
So I have a question about strategies that you might have at keeping a resident engaged and on track with their research when they come to you as a 2nd year in a 3-year program and say, I want to do this great project, and you have to explain to them that they will not finish the project during their time frame, given what you know about your IRB and everything. How do you keep them engaged in starting the project that somebody else is going to finish?
Well, our intention is not to have a resident start a project that they can't finish, because we really want them to see the full aspect of the process. We have had circumstances, certainly during COVID, when we had people who were trying to prospectively collect data, and that obviously got interrupted. We sort of let them, finish off another project, like jump on somebody else's project that was in the manuscript writing stage to get sort of the analysis, dissemination component of that. I get 3rd-year residents that are graduating in a month and a half that don't have their projects done, who came to me a month ago and wanted to do a project. So, we do try to focus them on something that is doable in the time frame that they have done, have to do that. I have a bulldog in my program research manager who hounds the residents incessantly about, do you have a mentor? Do you have a project? So we do track the milestones that we want them to accomplish as part of this, and we try to remind them that you're kind of behind the curve and let's get going. We encourage them to work on other projects. So we have some that have helped design some randomized controlled trials, but we try to encourage them that that's not your resident research requirement. So we have some residents that will barely get by their research requirement, and we have some that will work on 5 different projects, do 20 case reports on top of that, and really go at it. We had one resident write for one of those research grants last year. So it just really depends on the resident themselves, and then really hounding them to get it done. Start early.
And I think from the resident perspective, I remember being very gung-ho about a certain project I had during PGY2, and my mentor was like, that absolutely will not even be completed by the time you graduate. And that was heartbreaking to hear, because I remember going in with such passion, and like, it was one of those things. I woke up in the middle of the night, I wrote it down on a little pad of paper, and I was like, I'm so excited to go talk to them about that tomorrow. But the thing that kept me going was not getting BS'd by my mentor. And what I mean by that is, they were very objective in telling me in a kind way that like, this is not something that you can accomplish during your residency, but here are some other opportunities that I think would fit in line with your goals and your eventual 5-year plan for this research project. Here's a small little objective that we can do within the next year. So I think, things that I looked for that didn't totally kill my vibe for it was reflecting that enthusiasm back to me. And I think that's a very key component for it as someone that's been a mentee and hopefully going to be a mentor soon. And then, realizing what is doable within that short time frame, whether or not it's, a small QI project as opposed to like a huge RCT or something like that. So that would be my 2 points of wisdom as a resident perspective on it.
Hi, my name is Donald Wright, Yale School of Medicine. There have been a few references already to situations where residents either are late to the game in terms of getting research off the ground, or they get research off the ground and it crashes and burns and they're off the rails and it's year 2, year 3, whatever. Any specific strategies for salvaging those situations?
I think it depends on your institution and what your requirements are, right? Because some places actually have this really intense requirement where you have to submit a poster or something like that, and then other places have a very much more relaxed kind of approach to it, which is, you can do a QI project, wink wink, and we'll take care of it. So I think depending on where you work, where would you put yourself on that spectrum between the two extremes there?
Well, I'm a research fellow, so
okay that worked out for you. So no, that's great. It's a great question. I think it really depends on the context. It depends on where you work, where you're at, what your requirements are, because you're going to have to come up with something. You're going to have to MacGyver something for this person because you got nothing. That's not working, right? So I think having a deep pockets is good, to have someone, again, going back to this person who's like a maven or a very much in charge of the resident research effort. They'll probably know of some projects that they can whip out, or at least some ideas for projects. I heard a really great idea from one of my colleagues about at their shop, they actually have a little book. And if somebody comes across a cool case, they just put a sticker and a consent form that's completed in that little book, and they put it over here. And if that person wants to write it up, they can. If they don't, they can hand it off to someone else to write it up. What a great idea. I mean, we've probably all seen cases we could have written up, we just didn't, right? Maybe someone else could do that. And that would be potentially, depending on your shop, a legitimate, alternative. So I think having those alternative solutions available, knowing how to craft one, is important, because you're going to have to make it work for where you are, right, and what your requirements are.
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. A couple things. One would be knowing what the scholarly activity requirements are for that residency. That's one layer of this, right? And then the other layer is how do you facilitate residents being more involved in research in the academic process, which is could be a little bit above and beyond what that baseline scholarly activity thing is. And if you have that resident fails, I think it's really important to look at why that failed, right? Was it the resident? Was it something about them, or the mentor, or that process, or was there something structural that you might be able to change that lower some of those barriers to kind of get them involved? And so really thinking, I think, beyond just that individual resident, how do we recover this project, more think about okay, long-term, what are the ways that we can get more projects like this more efficiently done?
Hi, Anthony Zaffino, faculty at Riverside Regional, a small shop out in Newport News. Let's say theoretically that a relatively new program, you were given the responsibility of research, and now you are vaguely in over your head. What are like one or two things that just starting out were like absolutely necessities that like you would not be able to do this without, whether it's people, references online, other than the SAEM series you were talking about that I'll look into immediately, just things that like you absolutely need this to get things started?
I think you have to take a look at what your in-house resources really are and what level that's at, and engage other people and get them involved, right? I think if you're trying to do this all on your own, it's definitely a heavy lift. I think you have to decide what you want the requirement to be, and like James said, there is a wide variety out there of what institutions require, and I would say start there. Don't start with something. I mean, where we are today is 20 years in the making to get to this requirement. When I started there, we had a much simpler, more relaxed requirement for our program as well. So I don't think that you have to. Like there are some places that require people to submit manuscripts. So like, don't start there, right? It's not going to be successful. Build resources and like reference material for people. Start with more didactic teaching, I think, to get your faculty and your residents up to speed with where you want to go with that and what the skill sets that you need are, and so that you can offer that better to your residents.
And along those lines, like building that knowledge within the institution, but also like building relationships or getting resources to help out with the IRB side of things, to help out, like to know exactly what they want and what other regulatory things that are going to need to be overcome. Like those are things that can help with those barriers that can prevent research from going forward. But then I agree, like starting, if your job is to be responsible for the scholarly activity requirement as deemed by the ACGME, that's like a little bit of a different job than like you're in charge of making sure that the residents do research, or like that. Those are a little bit separate but related things.
Yeah, I have a question for you. Are you in charge of research for the whole department or just for the learners, just for residents and med students? Or the hypothetical person, is the hypothetical person, yeah, your friend. Okay. Because you'd rather have it the other way, right? You'd rather have established researchers in your department that you could tag them onto, but you don't, the hypothetical person wouldn't have that. So what I would say is, look for non-traditional things. For example, maybe it's not non-traditional, but med students are a great resource if you happen to have a med school nearby, or maybe even people that work at another shop that has a more developed research engine, for example. Collaboration is good. It still gets research done, and you still get people busy. You don't necessarily have to drive the bus. You could just be a passenger, right? So that could work. I think, you're probably, if you're just getting started with residents and learners, you're probably going to do like retrospective chart review research and stuff like that, which theoretically could be done unfunded, but still probably deserves some financial attachment, right? I mean, maybe it's for the faculty who are in charge of it. Maybe it's for some incentivization of the students or residents who are doing the work. Maybe it's just a pizza party at the end of the project to celebrate how awesome it was, right? So money is important for these things. And so I think you were mentioning talking to the people in charge of the department and kind of establishing some ground rules like, okay, what am I working with here? What resources am I going to get? Any money at all? A little bit? How much are you a good negotiator, I guess is the question, right? So, because you're going to need something. It doesn't, not much happens unless money's applied. And realistically, the culture has to exist. And that's probably the hardest part of the whole thing, is proving to everyone else in your department that research is important and that time needs to be spent and effort needs to be made. And I think you start there, right? Get everybody to buy in, figure out what resources you have, and then decide like what's really feasible here. At my shop, we've become very much more dependent on federal funds recently, but previous to this, we were like probably 70 or 80% industry research. And I'm just going to say right now, nothing wrong with it. I think it's great, because that's how people who have small engines get started, right? You can't just start out, you can't do an R1 the first year, right? So you got to have some way to make money and develop your research engine, hire people. There's going to be lag time otherwise. So maybe theoretically, once you get things started, start looking at industry or alternative sources or even some small grants like SAEM, EMF, that kind of thing. You don't want to aim too high, but what's wrong with aiming for a $5,000 or $10,000 grant right off? It's something that's probably manageable.
Just from the resident side itself, I would say one place that often gets overlooked as an easy bite for starting research projects is the operations side. They have a lot of incentive, and there's not a lot of complex statistical analysis that needs to go into understanding from a resident perspective, hey, I can improve throughput at the door by doing this simple thing and prove it. So just as far as that, would be my take on it.
The only thing I would add is just, again, from the resident perspective, one major change that I saw happen in my program with the introduction of dedicated faculty to resident research was, number one, having somebody easy to go to talk to that understands. And then number two is someone providing clear objectives of what they want you to accomplish by the end of your residency year. Because, when I started my residency, it was COVID, number one, and then number two, there was a large residency leadership turnover. So a lot was up in the air. So things didn't really get crystallized till my PGY2 year when finally they got feedback from graduating PGY4s that there was no real direct objective on what was supposed to be done with the scholarly project, how that was supposed to be visioned at the end of the time. So that would be the one thing I would recommend is just having, clear-cut people to talk to and then clear objectives for your residents to accomplish. And good luck.
I'm Sean McCormick. I'm one of the APDs at Wayne State University. I've gotten some feedback from the residents that they feel like they're not really sure where to start when how to identify a research mentor. So I was just wondering what the process is where you work of how you pair up a resident with a mentor for their scholarly activities. And is it all on the resident or is it all on the faculty or how does it work?
That's a good question. We don't have an excellent process for this. Myself and our vice chair for research, we do try to talk with all the faculty and find out sort of what their areas of interest are, because I'm in the office every day, right? So I'm easily accessible more so by the residents, and so oftentimes I will be the first discussion of their idea or their topic area, and so I will try to point them in the right direction of some other clinical mentor to drag onto their team, or so we do have a certain groups that are a little bit stronger that do more research, and so those areas are certainly a little bit more interesting and easier to get people to do projects in. One thing that we did last year, myself and one of the other faculty members sort of did a trial run of what's the process look like, right? So we went into lecture day and we throw out research questions, something that you think you might be researched, and we got 5 or 6 of them, and then we picked one and sort of showed people how the process of what we're asking them to do works, right? And then it sort of came out of that. There were probably 3 or 4 really good research questions, and we're we need now faculty to be here, right? So that when these ideas come up, it's sort of like a research match day. I was told that was a really bad term to use, but total PTSD. But sort of having a venue by which ideas can come up from either residents or from faculty, and then people who are interested in it can then find each other and sort of develop the project from there.
Yeah, I would agree. That's a great process in terms of identifying interesting projects. I think your question is maybe 2 different things. Are they having trouble finding an idea for what they want to research? They just have an interest in the idea of research or the process of research, but don't know what they are interested in researching. And so is it question generation and a workshop where you kind of work back and forth and examine a problem and pose questions? That's a good way to start thinking about those things. And the other aspect is finding mentorship within it. And we do similar things in terms of we have a running list of the people who are the researchers within the department and what their areas of focus are, and really rely on the resident research coordinator to kind of help pair when we know that there's a resident that's interested in education research, they go with this person. So
Yeah, I think it depends on the size of your department. You know, if you've got a small department, everybody probably knows what everybody's doing. If you've got a large department, that's not true. And that'd be even more important to have somebody who's delegated to kind of sort people out, you know, the sorting hat, and get people into the right duo, the right matchup with a mentor. One thing that we have done traditionally, we haven't done it recently, COVID kind of ruined it, but we used to have an annual resident research day. And, you know, the triple R, so resident research retreat. So we would actually spend a whole day of grand rounds, so about 5 hours, get together at an outside venue, someplace that looks a little different than what we usually do, and then people would get up and talk about their research. And maybe the residents would present their research projects for 10 minutes, or maybe the faculty would get up and talk about theirs for 10 minutes. And the idea was partly just to get a conversation started, to kind of know what the heck's going on in our department, but also if the people could see something that sounds really cool, like I'd like to be involved in that. And so that's an opportunity to do that. Also, we talked about different styles of scholarly activity, you know, basics on like how to do a case report, how to do a systematic review, like 10-minute talks, so, you know, people can stay paying attention, but they can also learn about different opportunities and things. It's one thing to get a handout during orientation as an intern. It's another thing to actually be in a room listening and talking about research ideas. So.
The only formal structure we have is we maintain a list of the researchers, what they're interested in, and what projects they're working on, and it's up to the resident themselves to reach out.
So 2 things I would recommend from my program. I was one of those people that when I started residency, if I heard the word research, I'd have to pop a famotidine and take a Maalox to, you know, settle my stomach because I was so averse to it. And now graduating, I want it to be a sizable part of my career. 2 things that really like honed that in for me and made it approachable for me as someone that was very intimidated by approaching research. One, at our program, and I'm sure other programs replicate this in some capacity, we call it the T-Rex. I don't know what it stands for, but it's like thoughtful review of literature in the clinical space or something along those lines. Wherein as residents, you know, there are questions like, why the hell do I have to get a guaiac on every lower GI bleeder, even though we all know it's nonsense? And we'd actually turn that into a day where we'd go to conference, we'd read the paper, we'd discuss it together, and discuss how that paper would impact or not impact our clinical decision. And that, like, for me, made evidence-based medicine seem more alive and applicable, and that got me a little more interested in being able to ask questions. What linked me up with the right people and linked me up with ability to start thinking on like research questions myself was, again, in our program, we have something that's called academic practice tracks. So we have 18 different tracks that are essentially all the subspecialties within emergency medicine. And the beauty of that is during the first 2 years, again, like I said, we're a 4-year program. The first 2 years, you can bounce around the academic practice tracks, sort of figure out as the undifferentiated EM resident what your niche is and what you want to be interested in. And the nice part about that is it provides a lot of facilitated mentorship. You may not recognize that you're looking for mentorship or looking for somebody to guide you until it's already happening sometimes, which happens a lot with the APTs, as I've seen over my tenure of residency. And then really in the senior time, it comes down to, is there something you want to do to help carve out that niche for yourself by the time you leave residency? And in a lot of ways, that's with some sort of research project. Again, with the facilitated mentorship, it's very easy at our institution. Again, we have a lot of faculty between Columbia and Cornell and a lot of institutional support for research to either just tag on to projects to get the experience or again, just a lot of the support through your senior elective time to do those. So, you know, that would be 2 points from the resident perspective, I would say, to help hook people into research in some way or get their interest up.
Hi, my name's Alyssa, and I'm actually a research coordinator from the University of Louisville. And I wanted to ask, what do you guys do in your programs to generate research ideas? Because as you know, there's usually a faculty champion or research director who has all these great ideas, and they end up kind of taking over the research of the department, and you have some other faculty who maybe aren't as great at generating ideas. So, you know, I have a resident who comes to me and says, I need to do research, I don't know what to do. And I have a faculty who comes to me and says, I need to do research, I don't have an idea. What do you do to get them thinking about projects and down a path? I like the idea of the case report book. So what else do you have like that?
So I can start. You know, a non-formal way, I think try to identify, as far as residents are concerned, I think the best way to recruit other residents is to have a resident champion. There's a few of my junior residents in here who know I will send out in our group WhatsApp research articles. I'll tell people you should write that up as a case report if someone has an interesting case they share in the WhatsApp chat. And that's really because, again, so this last year I finished as our education and research chief. Part of that was helping to ramp up scholarly productivity amongst our residents. I realized on a one-to-one basis it's a lot easier for someone to do a project like that or sort of like realize a research question they may be thinking of but not be able to verbalize it if they have someone to talk to that's approachable. And I like to think I'm pretty approachable amongst my junior residents and other learners. So I would argue to try to find a resident champion that may be passionate about research or your other residents can approach to help fund those questions. Because to be honest with you, I know this is a professional academic talk, a lot of those questions also come up when you're drinking, you're hanging out. People are like, why the heck did this service do this today? I don't understand. We should research this, we should investigate this. And sometimes that's where some of the best questions I've come up with have come from. So that would be my perspective from a resident side. I think try to find a resident champion that's approachable, but also is someone that could help muster the forces to do some research to get the scholarly productivity up.
So I think the one thing I would be remiss to not bring up would be the consensus conferences that we do every year. We did one yesterday, right? The purpose of those, there's like 25 of these now. The purpose of these is to define areas of research priority in specific topic or genres. So, for example, yesterday we were talking about how to improve diversity in emergency medicine researchers, right? And so what's going to come out of that conference is a whole mess of different research questions that we want to answer in the next 30 years. There's 25 of these things out there. Most of them published in AEM. You can find them. That's a great place to get ideas, right? And this is stuff that's important to emergency medicine as a specialty, that some very smart people sat in a room and came up with this big list, and you could just get that for free and just come up with some ideas there. So that's one idea. And that has to be something that speaks to the investigator that they really are interested in doing. I think the other thing is definitely having someone who is good at kind of taking ideas and either discarding them or helping to refine them. And it doesn't have to be a faculty member, it could be you, it could be anybody, but somebody who's got some experience, with looking at these questions, these clinical questions, and deciding if this is really like a feasible project. And if it's not feasible, how can I tweak it to make it still appealing to the person that wants to do the work, but more doable? When someone truly has no idea what research they want to do, I just wonder, should they be doing research? Because to me, that's not the spirit of the thing. It's supposed to be more about like finding out what inspires you and interests you and like learning how to learn about that. And so I think it's challenging if they have truly no interest in any topic, then I guess you transplant them something. But at the end of the day, I bet if you really talk to that learner, they'll have something that they're interested in. Maybe it's something they see themselves treating in the future, or that they really got excited about, or that their dad had, or they themselves had a medical issue, or something that's relevant to them. Because I feel like the more relevant the project is to the learner, the more likely they are going to complete it, and the better the product's going to be, right? Because they're really going to dive into that instead of just doing like the minimum work on it.
Yeah, so thank you all for your time in coming today. I'll just add on one additional thing. I really leave like each of these conferences with like pages and pages of research ideas. I don't know if you all do the same thing. And so like some of us, like I'm really good at generating ideas, and I literally have to learn to like, if it doesn't come up a second time in my head, like don't bother writing it down, because it, because I come up with so many ideas. So I think encouraging people, even if it's your local, med school research abstract presentation, or, the regional, SAEM conference, or whatever's kind of going on. I think that's a great idea generator for people. I know that that's kind of tough on a resident timeline to get people to a national meeting and to get them kind of to start generating ideas, but I think that's another kind of backup plan. So I want to thank you all for coming. Yes.
Can I mention something real quick?
Sure.
A couple of years ago, we presented an innovation here at the SAEM. We put up a site called coolresearcher.com, and the idea behind it is it guides a new researcher on how to ask a question, so that when they go to the mentors go crazy. You go to a mentor, it takes 10 sessions to try to actually get a useful question, right? Narrow it down, do the literature search. So this guides you on, at least you can go through the first steps and then send it to your
Yeah, so that's really great resource, and so I'm going to serve as the contact person here. So we have a whole cadre of people who are more than willing to interact on these topics and bring ideas, mentor people if you're a hypothetical new research director person somewhere, mentor residents. I think many of us would be willing to do that kind of outside of our own institutions and stuff for just the grace of doing so and for our own enjoyment. So my contact information is up here. I will gladly coordinate you to whoever you have kind of extra questions or expertise for. Or again, if you want to use me for mentoring residents or ask questions as well, we're all more than happy to do that. And I'm speaking for everyone by doing that. And they're just all going to smile and nod. Perfect. Thank you all for your time. I appreciate it.